Hi everyone, it's Carissa. Today I wanted to teach you the very basics of double knitting. Double knitting is a technique in which you create two layers of fabric at the same time. So you can see that in the brim of this hat. This is my Niefling hat design that will be released soon. And the brim of this hat is worked in double knitting. So I have the outer layer that has these fun rainbow speckles on the yarn, and the inner layer is solid purple. And these are two separate layers. I can actually pull them apart. Two completely separate layers for a nice thick squishy hat brim. And even though it is two separate layers, this fabric, both layers of fabric, are built up at the same time. So you'll have a stitch from the inner layer and a stitch from the outer layer on your needles at once, alternating, and you'll work them at the same time. So here I have some stitches cast on. I have an even number of stitches cast on in the two-color Italian cast-on method. I've got a tutorial video for that as well, which I will link down below for you. So I've cast on my stitches and I've worked the two setup rows, and I'm ready to join my stitches in the round and start working my hat. So the first thing I want to do before I join is to make sure that my stitches are not twisted. So if we lay them down on the surface here and make sure that the little bit of fabric that's built up is all around the outside here. I don't have any twists like that. That would be bad. That would not make a nice smooth brim of our hat. So we want to make sure that none of our stitches are twisted before we join in the round. So I'm going to take my stitches here and I'm going to pull the tail away and get that out of the way. And I'm going to take my stitch marker and put that on my right hand needle to mark the beginning of my round. And now I'm going to show you two different ways to work this double knitting technique. And the first way only works if we are working very basic double knitting, where it's a solid color on one side and the other solid color on the inside. So if there are any color changes, this version of the technique would not work. But for this hat brim, it'll totally work. So possibly the easier way would be to work one color at a time. So I'm going to start with my light color here, and I have the light colored stitches facing out on my cast on that I've already started the setup rows for. So when I take my light colored yarn, I'm just going to let my dark color hang out here in the back for a while. And I'm ready to start working with my light color. So that first stitch is a dark colored stitch. I do not want to work that stitch with my light color. I want to hold my light color in front of my work and simply slip that dark colored stitch as if to purl. So just slip it off the left needle and onto the right needle. Then the second stitch is a light colored stitch. So I'm going to bring my light color back to the back of my work, and I'm going to knit that stitch. And I'm going to pull that a little bit tighter than usual just to close up that beginning of round gap. And I'm going to alternate those two steps. Bring the yarn to the front and slip that dark colored stitch as if to purl. Bring the yarn to the back and knit the light colored stitch with the light color. Yarn to the front, slip as if to purl, yarn to the back, and knit. Yarn to the front and slip, yarn to the back, and knit. And similarly, if you work English style with the yarn in your right hand, you'll still be bringing the yarn to the front and slip that dark colored stitch, and then bring the yarn back to the back and knit the light colored stitch. Yarn to the front and slip, yarn to the back and knit. And these steps are exactly what you would have done for the setup rows, the first setup row after your two-color Italian cast on. So for standard, just basic solid colored double knitting, you can continue to work those setup rows one color at a time. Front, slip to the back and knit. The front, slip to the back and knit. I'm going to do that all the way around this round until I get back to that stitch marker for the beginning of my rounds. So now I'm almost back to my beginning of round marker. Just going to keep working with the light color, yarn in front and slip, yarn in back and knit. That's my last stitch before my beginning of round marker. So I'm just going to drop the light color. I don't need him right now. I'll slip the stitch marker over to my right hand needle. And now we're going to pick up our dark color yarn from the back and start working with that. So we're going to do the opposite of what we just did with the light color. We're going to work the dark color stitches and we're going to slip the light colored stitches. And instead of knitting, we're going to be purling. So I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and purl that dark colored stitch. And again, I'm going to pull that a little bit snug to try to close up that beginning of round gap. And then I'm going to bring the yarn to the back and slip that light colored stitch as if to purl. Yarn to the front between the needle tips and purl the dark colored stitch. Yarn to the back and slip the light colored stitch. Yarn to the front and purl the dark. Yarn to the back and slip the light. Same thing if you work English style. Going to bring to the yarn to the front and purl the dark colored stitch. Yarn to the back and slip the light colored stitch as if to purl. Yarn to the front and purl the dark colored stitch. Yarn to the back and slip the light colored stitch. Yarn front and purl. Yarn back and slip. And we're going to keep going with that all the way around to finish our second row. Purl with the dark color, slip with the light. Purl the dark, slip the light. And again, this should look familiar if you worked the two-color Italian cast on as your second setup round. Now I'm almost back to the beginning of round marker again, working with my dark color, purling the dark colored stitches and slipping the light colored stitches with my yarn in the back. And now I'll slip my stitch marker again for my beginning of round, and I've finished round 2. So if we look at what is happening here, I'm starting to build up my light colored fabric, my light colored stockinette stitch fabric, all knit stitches on the front layer. And at the same time on the back layer, I've got stockinette stitch with the dark color. But I'm purling those stitches. So if you think about it, we've got those two layers on top of each other. We've got stockinette stitch of the light color on the front, and what we're working on is the reverse stockinette stitch side of the dark colored fabric. So if we sandwich those two fabrics together, the stockinette stitch side of both colors is facing out, and the purls, the reverse stockinette stitch side of each layer, is on the inside. So what we've just done is gone around with one color at a time, knitting all the light colored stitches and just slipping all the dark colored stitches with the yarn in front. And then we went around with just the dark color, purling the dark colored stitches and slipping the light colored stitches with the yarn held in the back of our work. So that is the first way to work this solid colored double knitting technique. The other way would be to work both colors at the same time. And this is a little bit more fiddly because you are working with both colors at the same time. what I like to do, since I'm a continental knitter and I hold my yarns in the left hand, what I like to do is put one yarn between my index and my middle finger, and the other between my middle finger and my ring finger. So the first yarn is my front layer. My light colored yarn goes between my index and middle finger, and my dark colored yarn goes between my middle finger and my ring finger. And that just helps them, if they're going to get twisted, they'll get twisted between my hand and the balls, not between my hand and the project. So I shouldn't have any twists happening between my needles and my fingers. And then as I go through each stitch here, I'm going to work the green, the dark colored stitch needs to be purled with the dark colored yarn, but both yarns need to come to the front at the same time. So we'll bring both yarns to the front, but just purl with just the dark colored yarn, not the light colored yarn. So I'm just wrapping the dark color around my needle and not the light color. And I'll purl that stitch. And then both yarns will come back to the back so that I can knit the light colored stitch with just the light color. So I'm only grabbing the light color with my needle and knit that. So both yarns need to come to the front for me to purl with the dark color. And then both yarns need to go to the back so I can knit with the light color. Both yarns to the front, purl the dark, both yarns to the back, and knit the light. If you're an English style knitter, then maybe you want to try tensioning each yarn around a different finger. So say I did, let's do it this way. So I have, this is not very natural for me, so whatever works for you. So right now I have the light colored on my index finger and the dark color on my middle finger of my right hand. And I'm going to, so I need to purl the dark color stitch next. So both yarns need to come to the front between my needles, and I'm going to purl the dark colored stitch with just the dark colored yarn. Drop that off. Both yarns go back to the back of my work, and I'm going to knit the light colored stitch with just the light colored yarn, like such. Both yarns back to the front to purl with the dark. Not very cooperative. There we go. Both yarns back to the back and knit with the light. And maybe that's not comfortable for you either. Maybe you want to hold the light color in your left hand and the dark color in your right hand. But whichever way you hold them, you know both yarns need to travel together. So if I need to purl that dark colored stitch, both yarns need to come to the front before I can purl the dark colored stitch. And then both yarns need to go back to the back before I can knit the light colored stitch. Both yarns to the front and purl the dark. Both yarns to the back and knit the light. So whichever way you work this, if you hold them in both in your left, both in your right, one in each, any of that is fine. You just find what is most comfortable for you. Or since we're working solid one color on the front and solid the other color on the back, you can just alternate rows with just one color at a time, like I showed you at first. Whichever way you choose will work out just fine. And then you will have a fun double knit brim on your hat that you can flip over and wear with the other color out if you like, or you can flip the entire hat inside out and wear it with all purple or flip the rainbow speckles up. So many different ways to wear this hat, and it's super fun. So there are more complicated patterns of double knitting where you actually do change colors. So maybe you'll have a green stitch pop through to the front layer of the fabric, and you'll actually, have little pictures, little patterns that develop in the double knitting. And for that kind of double knitting, you will need to be able to work with both colors at the same time. But again, since for this video in particular, we're talking about solid color on one side and solid the other color on the other side. So those two different methods for working double knitting will both work. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a good day.